Same week. Two leaders. Two meetings with Ukrainian President Zelensky. One coordinated with the aggressor before meeting the victim. The other committed $22.5 billion to supporting democracy under attack. This is a story about leadership, about what it looks like when done right, and about what America is losing while the world watches. Let's start with Sunday at Mar-a-Lago. President Trump is meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukraine's president has traveled to Florida for what's being called crucial negotiations about his country's future. But before this meeting happens, Trump spends 2.5 hours on the phone with Vladimir Putin, the man whose military is actively bombing Ukrainian cities, the man whose forces occupy Ukrainian territory. Trump coordinates with Putin first, then meets with Zelensky. The optics alone are extraordinary, but wait until you hear what was actually said in that meeting. Now contrast that with what happened the same week in Ottawa. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney meets with Zelensky. No phone call with Putin first, no coordination with the aggressor. Just direct, clear, unwavering support for a democracy under attack. Two leaders, same week, same Ukrainian president seeking support. The difference in how they handled it reveals everything about leadership in this moment, and about the choice between standing with democracies or accommodating their adversaries. Let's break down the Trump meeting first, because the details matter. Zelensky arrives in Florida. He lands at the airport, and nobody from the U.S. government is there to greet him. Not the Secretary of State, not a senior defense official, not even a mid-level diplomat. The only person there to greet the president of Ukraine is Ukraine's own ambassador to the United States. Think about that for a moment. A wartime leader, whose country has been a key American partner, arrives for crucial negotiations, and the host nation doesn't send anyone to receive him. That's not an oversight. That's a choice, a signal. But it gets more striking. The meeting itself takes place in the dining room at Mar-a-Lago, not a formal conference room, not the Oval Office, obviously, not even a proper diplomatic venue. A dining room at a private club in Florida. For context, when Vladimir Putin visited Alaska for discussions with Trump, there was a red carpet, literally. American military personnel rolling it out. Formal ceremony. Full diplomatic protocol. Zelensky gets a dining room. The symbolism is impossible to miss, and diplomatic observers around the world noticed it immediately. But the venue is just the beginning. Let's talk about what Trump actually said during the press conference. A reporter asks Trump about Russia's role in potential Ukrainian reconstruction, about what responsibilities Moscow might have after the war they started. Trump's response: they're going to be helping. Russia's going to be helping. Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. Russia wants to see Ukraine succeed. This is Trump's characterization. Russia, the country that invaded Ukraine, that has been prosecuting a war of territorial conquest for 3 years, that is striking civilian infrastructure as Trump speaks, wants Ukraine to succeed. Then Trump goes further. He describes Putin as very generous in his feeling toward Ukraine succeeding. Generous. That's the word used to describe the leader whose military has caused hundreds of thousands of casualties, displaced millions, and reduced Ukrainian cities to rubble. This isn't diplomatic nuance. This isn't carefully calibrated language. This is a fundamental mischaracterization of observable reality. And Zelensky, standing right there, has to maintain diplomatic composure while hearing his country's existential struggle described as if Russia is a helpful partner rather than an aggressor. Now, let's look at what happened in Ottawa. Same week, different leader. Mark Carney meets with Zelensky in a proper diplomatic setting. The meeting is formal, respectful, appropriate to the gravity of the situation. And when Carney speaks, his language is completely different from Trump's. Here's what Carney said, and I want you to hear the actual words. Welcome. Thank you for taking this time at a crucial moment in this process. Under President Zelensky's leadership, we have the conditions, the possibility of a just and lasting peace. But that requires a willing Russia. Notice the word choice. A willing Russia, not a generous Russia. Not a helpful Russia, a willing Russia, acknowledging that Russian willingness to actually pursue peace is currently absent. Then Carney continues, "And the barbarism that we saw overnight, the attack on Kyiv, shows just how important it is that we stand with Ukraine during this difficult time." Barbarism. That's the word Carney uses to describe Russian attacks on civilian areas. Not complicated geopolitics, not both sides having legitimate concerns. Barbarism. Clear moral language. Unambiguous characterization of what's happening. Then comes the substance. We're announcing today further economic assistance for Ukraine. $22.5 billion worth of economic assistance that helps unlock financing from the IMF, from the World Bank, from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development to begin this process of rebuilding. $22.5 billion. Concrete commitment. Specific number. Real resources being deployed. Let's put these two approaches side by side because the contrast is remarkable. Trump talks to Putin for 2.5 hours before meeting Zelensky. Carney meets with Zelensky directly, as an ally should. Trump holds the meeting in a dining room. Carney provides proper diplomatic setting. Trump characterizes Russia as wanting to help. Carney calls Russian attacks barbarism. Trump offers vague statements about peace. Carney commits $22.5 billion. Trump ejects reporters from the meeting with a bizarre comment about food and bribes. Carney conducts diplomacy openly and professionally. One approach treats Ukraine as a problem to be managed through accommodation with Russia. The other treats Ukraine as a democracy deserving support against authoritarian aggression. These aren't just stylistic differences. They represent fundamentally different understandings of what's at stake and what leadership requires in this moment. Mark Carney's background helps explain his approach. He's not some political novice who stumbled into the Prime Minister's office. He was governor of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis, then became governor of the Bank of England, guiding the British economy through turbulent times. He understands global systems, strategic positioning, and long-term consequences. When he looks at the Ukraine situation, he doesn't just see immediate political considerations.
He sees the architecture of international order at stake. Carney recognizes that if territorial conquest through military force becomes acceptable in Europe, the precedent matters everywhere. If democracies won't support each other against authoritarian aggression, the entire post-World War II security framework unravels. So when he commits $22.5 billion,
that's not just about Ukraine. That's about reinforcing the principle that democracies stand together, that borders can't be changed by force, that aggression has consequences. That's strategic thinking. That's leadership with understanding of what's actually at stake. Now let's talk about what Trump said about American support. During the press conference, Trump was asked about security guarantees for Ukraine. His response, "What a dumb question. Nobody even knows what the security agreement is going to say." That's not diplomatic language. That's dismissive of a fundamental concern. Ukraine needs to know whether it can count on continued American support, whether there will be concrete security commitments, whether the United States will stand with Ukraine long-term. Trump's answer reveals he either hasn't thought through these details or doesn't consider them important enough to address seriously. Compare that to Carney's approach. The $22.5 billion isn't just money. It's structured to unlock additional financing from international institutions. It's designed to begin reconstruction processes. It signals long-term commitment. That's the difference between vague promises and concrete policy, between political theater and actual leadership. The international response to these two approaches has been striking. European officials, speaking privately to journalists, have been clear about which model they find more credible. The Carney approach, clear moral language, concrete commitments, unwavering support, aligns with how European nations have been handling Ukraine policy. The Trump approach, accommodation with Russia, ambiguous commitments, coordination with the aggressor before meeting the victim, represents a fundamental divergence from Allied consensus. This matters enormously for Ukraine's strategic position. When Ukrainian officials plan for the future, they need to know who they can count on, which commitments are reliable, which partners will be there when needed. Right now, Canadian commitments feel more dependable than American ones. European support feels more stable than American support. Not because of capabilities. America has far more resources than Canada. But because of consistency and clarity of purpose. That's a remarkable shift. And it's driven by leadership choices, by whether leaders choose to stand clearly with democracies under attack or seek accommodation with their attackers. Let's address what Trump said about Putin's intentions, because this is crucial. Trump claims Putin told him about plans to help Ukraine rebuild, about providing energy at low prices, about wanting Ukrainian success. These claims are either sincere, meaning Trump actually believes Putin's stated intentions, despite all evidence to the contrary, or their diplomatic positioning that fundamentally misrepresents the situation. Either way, they create problems. If Trump genuinely believes Putin wants to help Ukraine, then American policy is being built on premises that don't match reality. And negotiations based on false premises can't produce sustainable outcomes. If Trump is deliberately mischaracterizing Putin's position for political purposes, then he's undermining Ukrainian negotiating positions by suggesting Russia has benign intentions when Russia's actions demonstrate otherwise. Carney doesn't have this problem. He calls Russian actions barbarism because that's what they are. He doesn't need to reconcile contradictions between Putin's words and Russia's actions because he's focused on the actions. That clarity makes policy coherent. It makes commitments credible. It makes Canada a reliable partner. The $22.5 billion deserves closer examination because of how it's structured. This isn't just Canadian government spending being transferred directly. It's designed to leverage additional resources from international financial institutions. When Canada commits that funding, it helps unlock World Bank resources, IMF financing, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development programs. The multiplier effect means the actual resources available for Ukrainian reconstruction are substantially larger than the Canadian contribution alone. That's sophisticated policy design. That's understanding how international financial architecture works and using it strategically. It also sends a signal to other nations. Canada is serious enough about this commitment to structure it for maximum leverage. Other countries can build on this foundation knowing there's real substance behind it. Compare that to Trump's vague statements about Russia wanting to help with reconstruction. There's no concrete mechanism, no clear commitment, just assertions that don't match Russian behavior or stated positions. The diplomatic protocol violations in Trump's handling are worth noting because they signal broader problems. No greeting at the airport, dining room instead of proper venue, ejecting reporters with bizarre comments about food and bribes, spending hours coordinating with Putin before meeting Zelensky. Each of these would be notable on its own. Together, they create a pattern that diplomats around the world have noticed and are factoring into their strategic calculations. When your ally treats you with less respect than they show your adversary, you adjust your expectations. You build alternative relationships. You prepare for scenarios where that ally might not be reliable. That's exactly what's happening. European nations are strengthening defense coordination among themselves. Canada is diversifying its economic relationships. Japan and Australia are building partnerships that don't depend on American leadership. Not because they want to, because American behavior under Trump has made it necessary. Carney's approach reminds everyone what Allied leadership looks like when done properly, and that reminder makes the contrast with Trump's approach even more stark. Let's talk about what Trump said about territorial concessions. During the press conference, Trump stated that some of that land has been taken. Some of that land is maybe up for grabs, and suggested Ukraine would be better off making a deal now. This is presenting Putin's talking points. Russia claims it controls territory it largely doesn't hold. Putin wants that territory handed over diplomatically because taking it militarily would cost enormous casualties and might not be achievable. Trump is essentially pressuring Ukraine to concede territory based on Russian claims rather than battlefield reality. Carney's position is completely different. He supports Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. The $22.5 billion is for reconstruction of Ukraine within its recognized borders, not for helping Ukraine adjust to permanent territorial loss. One approach accepts territorial conquest as fait accompli. The other maintains the principle that borders can't be changed by force. These aren't equally valid diplomatic positions. They're fundamentally different visions of international order. The response from Ukrainian officials has been diplomatic but telling. They maintain necessary relationships with Washington because American support, when it flows, remains significant. They can't afford to openly criticize the U.S. president. But their strategic planning increasingly centers on the European-Canadian coalition. On relationships with partners whose commitments don't seem contingent on individual leadership preferences or political wins, Carney's approach provides strategic stability. The commitment is clear. The moral position is unambiguous. The financial support is concrete and structured for long-term impact. That's what Ukraine needs from its partners. Not ambiguity, not coordination with the aggressor, not pressure to accept territorial losses, clear support, concrete commitments, unwavering solidarity. Canada is providing that. Under Carney's leadership, Canada is showing what it means to be a reliable ally. The broader implications extend beyond Ukraine. When democracies around the world see how Trump handles Ukraine versus how Carney handles Ukraine, they draw conclusions about reliability. If you're Taiwan, watching America coordinate with the aggressor before meeting the victim, what do you conclude about American commitment to defending democracy? If you're a Baltic state in NATO, seeing Trump show more respect to Putin than to Zelensky, what do you think about Article 5 commitments? If you're any democracy facing pressure from a more powerful authoritarian neighbor, watching Trump, describe Russian aggression as Russia wanting to help. What confidence do you have in American support? The message being sent is devastating for American credibility, and Carney's contrasting approach makes the message even clearer. This is what leadership looks like. This is what allied commitment looks like. And America, under Trump, is failing to provide it. Let's end with the fundamental question this contrast raises. What does leadership require in this moment? Does it require coordination with aggressors before meeting their victims, or direct support for democracies under attack? Does it require accommodation of territorial conquest, or defense of the principle that borders can't be changed by force? Does it require vague promises and political theater, or concrete commitments and clear moral language? The answer seems obvious when you see it laid out this directly. Mark Carney showed what leadership looks like this week. $22.5 billion, clear language about barbarism, unwavering support for democracy, concrete action rather than empty words. Donald Trump showed the alternative. Coordination with Putin, a dining room at Mar-a-Lago, characterization of Russian intentions that contradicts observable reality, pressure on Ukraine to concede. Two approaches, two visions of what allied leadership means. The world is watching, and the world is drawing conclusions about who can be counted on and who cannot. Canada gets it. Under Carney's leadership, Canada understands what's at stake and is acting accordingly. America, under Trump, is failing this test of leadership. And the consequences will extend far beyond Ukraine, affecting American credibility and influence for years to come. That's the masterclass. That's what we saw this week. One leader showed how it's done. The other showed how it falls apart. There's one more revealing moment worth examining. When asked about Americans who died fighting for Ukraine, Trump responded, "What a shame they died in a country, a foreign country." No acknowledgement of sacrifice. No recognition of what they fought for. Just regret. They died abroad. Carney spoke about barbarism and standing with Ukraine during difficult times. He contextualized support within a moral framework, democracies helping democracies resist aggression. That's the difference between transactional thinking and values-based leadership. Trump sees Ukraine as a foreign problem. Carney sees it as a test of whether democracies will defend each other. The historical context matters. After World War II, America built an alliance system on the premise that democracies would stand together. That architecture rested on reliable American leadership. Trump's approach undermines that foundation. If American support depends on personal relationships with authoritarians, the system collapses. Carney's approach reinforces it. Canada demonstrates what allied commitment looks like: clear, consistent, principled. In doing so, Canada fills a leadership vacuum America created. That's extraordinary. This matters for America's global position. American influence has always rested on more than power. It's rested on being reliable, being a partner others could count on. That reputation erodes with each contrast like this week. When Canada demonstrates more reliable leadership than America, when Ukraine centers strategic planning on non-American partners, that's a fundamental shift. Carney understands this. His approach isn't just about Ukraine, it's about demonstrating Canadian reliability, building influence through consistent values and concrete action. America under Trump squanders 8 decades of built influence through accommodation with authoritarians over support for democracies. The economic dimension connects to Carney's broader strategy. That $22.5 billion isn't just aid. It's investment in relationships, positioning Canada as a key partner in Ukrainian reconstruction, building economic ties that last beyond this war. When Ukraine rebuilds, Canadian companies will be part of that process. Canadian expertise valued, Canadian relationships strong. That's strategic economic positioning combined with moral leadership. Understanding that doing right can serve national interests when done intelligently. Trump's approach offers no such vision. Reactive, personality-driven, disconnected from clear national interest. Leadership isn't just about having resources. America has far more than Canada. But resources without strategic vision, moral clarity, consistent commitment, those don't translate into effective leadership. Carney showed what leadership requires: clarity about values, concrete action backing words, strategic thinking connecting immediate decisions to long-term objectives, unwavering support for principles that matter. Trump showed what happens without those elements: confusion about partners, coordination with adversaries, empty rhetoric, erosion of alliances that have been foundations of American power. The Masterclass isn't just about Ukraine. It's about what leadership means in this moment, about whether democracies stand together or allow authoritarian aggression to succeed. Canada chose to stand. America, under Trump, chose something else. The world is watching, drawing conclusions, adjusting strategies. One nation rising to the moment, another falling short. The contrast is the lesson.